Welcome back to another episode of SmoothBrainEDH, where we make the smoothest plays with the biggest brains. We've got a really special episode for you all today. We had a few members of You'reDeadNextTurn on for a game, so let's see what they and the SmoothBrain crew brought to the table. First up is Tim on Tovolar, Dire Overlord. This Gruul deck is focused around werewolves, hoping to amass an army of hungry creatures to devour his opponents. He keeps a hand with the Forest, Temple of Abandon, Terramorphic Expanse, Farseek, Kessig Naturalist, Fangblade Brigand, and Vigor. Next up is Ashley on Falco Spara, Pact Weaver. This Bant deck is all about counters, placing plenty of various types of counters on his creatures and removing them to cast spells using Falco Spara's ability. She starts the game with an island, Seaside Citadel, Spara's Headquarters, Sunglass Prairie, Exotic Pets, Killshot, and Denry Kiln, Editor-in-Chief. Our third player today is Sam on Chishiro, the Shattered Blade. This Gruul deck is focused around modifying creatures in order to amass a board of tokens and power up some strong creatures. He keeps a hand with Prismatic Vista, Opal Palace, Buried Ruin, Commander's Plate, Lizard Blades, Doubling Season, and Rishkar's Expertise. Last is Matt on Raffine, Scheming Seer. This Esper deck is focused around drawing as many cards as possible, using Raffine to cycle through the deck at an accelerated rate. His starting hand has a Plains, an Island, a Swamp, Otawara, Soaring City, Chromox, Orzhov Signet, and Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. We're about to hop right into the game, but before that, go ahead and give us a like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any of our new content. We post new gameplay videos every week and new episodes of our podcast every other week, so you won't want to miss it. Links to the deck lists, our social media, and our public Discord server are in the description. Our channel is also partnered with Dragon Shield, so if you're looking to pick up any new sleeves or match-related products, check out our affiliate link in the description. Now, on to the gameplay.
As previously mentioned, we're playing with You'reDeadNextTurn today. They make a lot of awesome Magic content, so go check out their channel. I'll put a link in the description for you. Sam wins the die roll, and he starts things off with a Buried Ruin. The turn is then passed to Tim, who plays a Temple of Abandoned, scries one to the bottom, and passes. Now on Ashley's turn, she'll play a Spara's Headquarters tab and pass to Matt. Matt will start off with a Swamp, and then cast a Chromox, imprinting Jace. He'll then pass the turn to Sam, who will play a Prismatic Vista and immediately crack it for a Mountain. He'll then shortcut a little by casting Lizard Blades, then going to search for the Mountain, and passing the turn to Tim. Tim will play a Forest as land for turn, then tap for 2 to cast Farseek. He'll find a Mountain to the battlefield tapped, and then pass the turn while searching. Ashley will play Seaside Citadel tapped, and then pass to Matt. Matt will play his Plains, tap for 3 to cast Raffine, and then pass to Sam, who will start off with an Opal Palace as land for turn, then tap for 2 to cast a Sword of the Animist. Sam will then move to combat and swing his Lizard Blades at Ashley for 2. The turn will then be passed. Tim will start his turn off with a Terramorphic Expanse, he'll immediately crack it for a Mountain, then tap for 3 and cast a Weaver of Blossoms. Oh boy, day-night shenanigans. The turn is then passed to Ashley. She'll play an Island as land for turn, then tap for 3 to cast Janara. The turn will then be passed to Matt. And Matt will play his Island as land for turn, then move to combat, swinging Raffine at Tim. When Raffine attacks, he'll connive for 1, drawing a card and discarding a Muldrifter. Raffine will get a counter, and Tim will take 2 commander. Now in Matt's second main phase, he'll tap for 2 to cast Orzhov Signet. He'll then tap for 3 more and cast one of my favorite cards from New Capenna, Smuggler's Share. Sorry it's hidden by the card art, but it is there. Matt will pass the turn to Sam after that. And Sam will start off with a Yavimaya. After this, he'll pay 2 and equip Sword of the Animist to his equipment. Then he'll move to combat and swing those Lizard Blades at Matt. When it attacks, he gets to search for a basic and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Sam will then pass the turn, and it'll become nighttime, transforming the Weaver of Blossoms into Blossom Cloud Werewolf. Matt should also get a treasure token, but he's frantically looking for one right now. Now in Tim's turn, he'll start off with a Forest. He'll then cast a Kessig Naturalist, and since it is nighttime, it'll enter as Lord of the Ulvenwald. He'll then tap for 3 and cast Tovolar, which enters as the Midnight Scourge. He'll then move to combat and swing Blossoms at Sam. When it connects, he'll draw a card, and then he'll pass the turn. On end step, Smuggler's Share draws Matt a card, and then it'll become daytime. Now on her turn, Ashley will start off with a basic island. Then tap for 4 mana to cast Denry Kiln, and Denry will enter with a Vigilance counter. Ashley will then move to combat and swing for 3 in the air at Tim. And after that, she'll pass the turn to Matt. And Matt starts his turn off by casting a Ledger Shredder. He'll then move to combat and thinks a little bit, but ultimately decides to swing at Ashley in the air with Raffine. He'll connive, drawing a card and discarding Mystic Confluence and putting another counter on Raffine, meaning Ashley will take 3 commander. Now in his second main, he'll tap for 3 and cast a Council's Judgment. When he does, Ledger Shredder will connive, he'll draw a card and discard a Swamp. Now with the Council's Judgment, Matt will vote for Lizard Blades, Sam will vote for Denry, and both Tim and Ashley will also vote for Lizard Blades, exiling it. Now that that's resolved, Matt will play an Exotic Orchard and then pass the turn. Now on his turn, Sam will start off with a mountain and then tap for 5 mana, filtering 1 through his Opal Palace to cast Chishiro, who will get a 1/1 counter when he enters. He'll then tap for 1 more to cast a Commander's Plate, which causes Matt to connive, drawing a card and discarding a Sage of Hours and getting Ledger Shredder a +1/+1 counter. Sam will also get a 2/2. After this, the turn is passed and Chishiro gets an additional counter. The turn is now Tim's, and on his upkeep, Tovolar will trigger, turning it to night. Now in his main phase, he'll play an additional forest, then tap for 6 to cast a Vigor. Tim will then move to combat, swing for 5 at Matt, 3 at Ashley, and 4 at Sam. Sam blocks with Chishiro, and when damage goes through, the Blossom-clad Werewolf will get 6 +1/+1 counters, and then Tim will draw 2 cards. He'll then move to his end step, and Matt will draw a Smuggler's Share, then the turn will be Ashley's. And she'll play a Forester's Land for turn, then tap for 5 to cast a Shield Broker. She decides to put the shield counter on Tim's Vigor, and she'll gain control of it. Oh yeah, and the Shield Broker also gets a Vigilance counter when it enters. Ashley will then move to combat and swings for 2 at Tim. And after that, the turn will be passed to Matt. And Matt will start off by tapping for 5 and casting a Psychosis Crawler. He'll then cast an Esper Sentinel, and this will trigger his Ledger Shredder. The card he discards is Timna, and his Psychosis Crawler will cause everyone to lose a life. Matt will then move to combat and swings with Raffine, conniving 1, and discarding an island. Psychosis Crawler will trigger, and Raffine was going at Sam, so Sam will take 3 commander. The turn will then be passed to Sam. And it should turn to day here, but everyone forgets. But don't worry, Sam doesn't cast any spells on his turn, so it'll become night by the time it hits Tim's turn anyway. And Sam will start his turn off by equipping Commander's Plate. He'll then equip Sword of the Animus to Chishiro, play a mountain, and then move to combat. He'll swing a 10 power Chishiro at Matt, who can't block it, and then his 2/2 Spirit with Menace at Tim. Sword of the Animus triggers, and Sam gets a forest to the battlefield tapped. There are no responses from anyone else, so damage is taken. Sam will then move to end step, and Matt will get a treasure. Now on Tim's turn, he'll play a command tower. He'll then immediately move to combat and swings for 8 at Sam. Sam can't do anything, so when they connect, he'll draw 2 cards. Also, Lord of the Uvenwald makes a red mana. He'll then use that red mana and tap for 1 more to cast a Gruul Signet and will pay for Esper Sentinel. After this, he casts a Burly Breaker, which enters as a Dire Strain Demolisher. Ledger Shredder will trigger from this. After drawing, Matt will discard Otawara, and then Psychosis Crawler will trigger. Tim will then pass the turn, and on his end step, Smuggler's Share draws Matt a card, and everybody is drained again from Psychosis Crawler. At the beginning of Ashley's turn, it'll turn to daytime, and then she'll play a Sungrass Prairie as land for turn on her first main. She'll then tap for 3 and cast a Midnight Clock, and will pay for Esper Sentinel. She'll then move to combat and swings for 3 in the air at Matt, and 5 on the ground at Sam. Sam will take 5, and Matt will block with Ledger Shredder, putting 3 counters on Gennaro when they connect. The turn will then be passed to Matt. And on Matt's upkeep, Midnight Clock gets a counter. And then when he draws, Psychosis Crawler will trigger. Now in his first main, he drops a Soul Ring. He'll then move to combat and swing both his flyers at Sam, conniving twice. He'll draw 2, then discard a land and obscure a Confluence, putting 1 counter on Raffine. Psychosis Crawler will also trigger twice, and then Sam takes 7. Matt will then play a Scalding Tarn as land for turn on his second main, then fetches with it for a Tundra. He'll then tap completely out, floating 8 mana, and then cast a Meat Hook Massacre, X is equal to 6. It'll resolve, and everything with 6 or less toughness will die. 3 of Matt's creatures die to this, so all of his opponents will lose 3 life, and then 8 of his opponent's creatures die, so he'll gain 8 life. After this, Matt passes to Sam, and the clock gets a counter. Sam is at a very dangerous life total, and Matt just did some decent damage to him last turn. He could also kill him with command damage, and starts asking Matt why he shouldn't kill him this turn. Matt just answers, if you swing out at me and kill me, Tim will kill you on his turn. And he kinda has a point. But before Sam decides on anything, he wants to cast a Rishkar's Expertise to draw 11 cards. And that is exactly what he does. And then he'll use its second ability to cast an Arcane Signet for free. He'll then play a Game Trail, revealing a mountain from his hand, then cast a Basilisk Collar, and equips it to Chishiro. He also gets a free 2/2. Sam then decides whether or not he's going to kill Matt this turn. Matt politely asks him not to, and Sam is merciful. He swings Chishiro at Tim. So Sam will gain 11 while Tim takes 11. Sam also doesn't want to give Matt another treasure, so he will decline the Sword of the Anime trigger. And Sam will pass the turn, and Matt gets a smuggled card. Sam also has to discard 6 cards on his cleanup, and then the turn will be Tim's. And Tim starts off with a basic mountain as land for turn. Oh yeah, and Ashley's Clock gets a counter on his upkeep. He'll then tap for 5 and recast Tovolar, and then cast one of my favorite cards in Werewolf Tribal, Unnatural Moonrise. And so it'll become night, and Blossom-clad Werewolf will be his target. He'll then move to combat and swing a 10/10 at Sam. Sam will block with his 2/2 and then takes 8, and Tim will get to draw 2 cards. Matt also gets to gain a life off his Massacre. He will then pass the turn to Ashley, Matt will draw a card off Smuggler's Share, and Ashley will also stop on end step to put a counter on her clock. It'll become daytime, and then on Ashley's upkeep, she'll get another counter on her clock. She'll then play a Port Town as land for turn, unfortunately it enters tapped, and then she decides to cast him, the Pact Weaver known as Falco Spara, and he'll enter with a shield counter. After this, Ashley will pass the turn to Matt. There's another counter put on the clock, and then Matt will play a Swamp. Tim then attempts to goad Matt into swinging for lethal at Sam, saying that if Sam wants it, you're dead on his next turn. And Matt agrees with Tim. He swings with Raffine for 4 in the air, and then connives for 1. The card he discards is a Big Game Hunter, which puts a counter on Raffine. The Big Game Hunter also has Madness, and Matt does pay for it. And when it enters the battlefield, he'll have its ability target Tim's Blossom-clad Werewolf, but Tim has a heroic intervention, and he casts it. The table then moves to damage, and unfortunately, Sam is dead. Post-combat, Matt will tap for 2 black and cast a Dothy Voidwalker. He'll then tap for 4 more to cast a Smothering Tithe, everybody's favorite white card. And after that, the turn is passed to Tim. The clock gets another counter. And Tim plays a Forest. And Tim will not pay for Smothering Tithe, but he will pay for a Dustwatch Recruiter, and then a Fangblade Brigand, then a Full Moon's Rise, and then finally a Gruul Charm, ensuring that no creatures without flying can block this turn. He'll then move to combat and swing for 13 at Matt. Matt has no choice but to take it, and then when damage goes through, Tim will draw 2 cards. And he doesn't pay for Smothering Tithe. The turn is then passed to Ashley, who stops on end step to put another counter on the clock, but unfortunately forgets to put one on upkeep. But she remembers later, and everybody's cool with it. And Matt also misses a Smothering Tithe trigger. But now on her main phase, she'll cast an Exotic Pets to make 2 fish tokens that can't be blocked, and one of them will get a shield counter. After this, she'll move to combat and swing for 3 in the air at Matt with Falco Spara. And then we'll pass the turn. Another counter is added to the clock. Matt will then move to combat and swing Raffine and his Voidwalker at Ashley. He targets his Raffine with Connive 2, and then Ashley responds by killing it with a Killshot. And she will pay for the ward. Killshot will get exiled, and Meathook Massacre will trigger when Raffine dies. Now in a second main, Matt drops a Bolas' Citadel. Fun. He'll then pay 3 for a Rhystic Study, and then passes the turn to Tim. Ashley's clock's a ticking on Tim's upkeep, and Tovolar will make it night. Tim also does not pay for Smothering Tithe. Tim will then play a Forest as land for turn, then plays a Lifecrafter's Bestiary, not paying the 1. He'll then tap for 4 to cast a Nightpack Ambusher, also not paying the 1, but he will pay the 1 to draw his own card. But he won't pay for Smothering Tithe. Unfortunately, Tim was not able to find the answer he was looking for when he drew that card, so he full swings at Matt. Matt will stay in the attack step and activate Bolas' Citadel. He'll sacrifice 6 of his treasure tokens, both of his creatures, and 2 mana rocks to make all of his opponents lose 10 life. This unfortunately kills Tim. And not to mention 2 of Matt's creatures die, so an additional 2 life is lost. The turn is now Ashley's, and the clock strikes 12, meaning she gets a free Time Twister. Hopefully she's able to find something. Midnight Clock is also exiled. She does not pay for any of those Smothering Tithe triggers, and doesn't pay on her draw step either. Now in her main phase, she'll play a Canopy Vista as land for turn, and luckily she finds a way to deal with the Bolas' Citadel. She'll drop a Steelbane Hydra, X is equal to 2, and won't pay for Rhystic Study. She'll then pay 3 mana to activate Steelbane Hydra to destroy the Bolas' Citadel, and the ability resolves. After this, she'll move to combat and swing for 5 at Matt, who has to take it. The turn is then passed. Upon Matt's draw, he chuckles to himself, sacrifices 4 treasures, and plays Aetherflux Reservoir. But that's not it. He then pays 1 and casts Sensei's Divining Top, gaining 2 life when he casts it. If you aren't aware, that's an infinite combo with Bolas' Citadel. You just keep putting it back on the top of your library and casting it by paying 1 life, gaining infinite life, and then Death Starring your enemies. Matt will then pay to look at the top 3 with Top, and then plays an Arid Mesa as land for turn. He'll then activate Top to draw a card and put Top on top. He'll then pay 2 to cycle an Archfiend of Ifnir to draw Top, then cast Top to gain 3 life, then fetches with Arid Mesa for a Scrubland, then casts Mana Crypt to gain 4 life, then overloads a Cyclonic Rift and gaining 5. The turn is then passed to Ashley, and the Tithe tax is not paid on draw step. She'll then recast Hydra, X is 2, she won't pay for Rhystic Study, and then removes a counter to destroy Aetherflux Reservoir. Matt will respond by activating Top to look at the top 3, the Reservoir will be destroyed, and then Ashley will play Broker's Hideout as land for turn. When it enters, she sacrifices it, gains a life, and finds a forest to the battlefield tapped. The turn will then be passed to Matt, and Matt gets a Smuggled Treasure on instep. Matt loses his Crypt Roll and takes 3 on his upkeep, and then knowing what's at the top of his library, he plays a Windswept Heath and then fetches with it. He nabbed a Prairie Stream with it, then activates Top to rearrange the top 3 of his library. He'll then activate Top again to draw a card and put it on top, then pays 6 mana to cast Farewell, exiling all creatures. After this, he'll cast Animate Dead to get his Psychosis Crawler back from the graveyard. And finally, he recasts Raffine and then passes the turn. Matt will miss a Smothering Tithe trigger on draw step, and then Ashley will recast her commander, Falco Spara, and will pay for Rhystic Study. She'll then cast Swiftfoot Boost, paying for Rhystic Study again, and then equips it to her commander. She'll then play Vivid Growth, then swing with Spara, and then pass the turn to Matt, and there will be a Psychosis Crawler trigger on his draw step. He'll lose his Crypt trigger again, but then moves to combat, and swings with both of his creatures, conniving for 2. He'll draw 2, and then discard 2 non-land cards. His Crawler will get 2+1/+1 counters, and then trigger twice. And with 4 cards in hand, this makes Psychosis Crawler and Raffine's damage enough to kill Ashley. So the winner of today's game is Matt. Congrats, man, and good games to everyone. Well, everyone, there you have it. As it turns out, drawing cards is very powerful, and Raffine is very good at that. Thanks again to Tim and Ashley from You'reDeadNextTurn for playing with us. As I said before, they make Magic content as well, so if you're interested in checking any of it out, just search You'reDeadNextTurn or check the link in the description. As always, you guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like and a comment letting us know. Don't forget to subscribe as well if you're not already, and check out all of our extra content on our channel. As always, you guys, thank you so much for watching, and have a smooth day.